The floorboards creaked beneath my feet, but no one noticed. I was standing outside the office, my hand half raised to knock, when I heard my father's voice, calm and dismissive, as if reading from a shopping list. "Your sister isn't worth a penny. She's been fired." I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. The sound of my own heart pounding overwhelmed me. Inside, Celine didn't protest. She didn't stop. Then I heard my mother, Helena, hum softly, a hum of satisfaction. I stepped back a little, just enough to see through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. Helena was sitting on the edge of the leather sofa, a cup of tea in her hand, her mouth curled in that narrow, confident smile she used whenever a plan worked. She looked satisfied, calm, as if my dismissal hadn't been cruel. It had been inevitable. I closed my eyes and moved away before they saw me. The climb upstairs felt longer than it should have been. My feet felt light, but my limbs felt heavy as lead. I didn't cry. Not then. And I never would. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and opened my laptop. My fingers moved faster than my thoughts, passwords, security codes, verification messages. Within minutes, everything I owned had been transferred to a private account. An account they didn't know existed and never would. They thought I'd just stand there frozen in that hallway, too stunned to move. They thought I'd just keep playing the help, the disappearing, the safe. What they didn't know was that I'd suspected something for weeks. The unanswered invitations, the forced smiles, the inheritance papers that never arrived in my inbox. What they didn't know was that I knew about my grandmother's second trust fund. The one they'd tried to pretend never existed. The one that had been due 2 weeks ago. I closed the laptop gently, walked to the closet, and opened the top drawer beneath the old scarves and a photograph of Hazel. There, a scrap of paper in her handwriting had one name on it. Mine. It didn't start with the trust. It started quite simply. My name was missing from the group email about Thanksgiving plans. A family photo posted on Helena's social media accounts had been cropped just below my shoulder. A dinner where Celine raised a toast to the family, completely ignoring me. I convinced myself that grief was what made people act strangely after a loss. Maybe I'd become a ghost in their house because I reminded them of Grandma so much. I even apologized loudly once for being too talkative lately. No one corrected me. Looking back, I see now that it was all a rehearsal. A slow, systematic dismantling of my place at the table. One polite omission after another. Celine had always been their favorite, not because she asked for it, but because she was a master at it. She knew how to listen attentively when Helena talked about the inheritance. She'd learned Dad's formal style before she even got a job. She was the one they presented at events, the one who got a room with a great view and a seat near the will. And I was useful, quietly unseen. The one who helped my grandmother balance her accounts when her hand started shaking too much. The one who wrote the thank you notes Helena never even glanced at. The one who kept everything together, so they could pretend nothing was falling apart. I told myself that being obedient would be enough, but Celine was always 5 steps ahead. And Helena was planning for the distant future. That smile I saw yesterday wasn't new. I'd seen it before at Christmas when I arrived with the presents and discovered dinner had been moved. At my grandmother's funeral, when I gave the eulogy and no one applauded. But Helena said, that was brave. I didn't know what I was looking at until now. I opened the paper from Hazel's drawer and read it again. The ink was still clear months later. There was an address, a name, and a key stuck to the back. The key fit perfectly into the lock beneath Hazel's old sewing table. I hadn't touched that drawer in years. My grandmother used to joke that it held memories best left folded. But when I opened it, its contents didn't feel like memories. They felt like instructions. There were 3 things inside. First, a legal envelope heavy and engraved, bearing the words Amendment to Last Will and Testament. I recognized the notary's seal, the witnesses' signatures, and the date, just 1 month before Hazel died. My name was printed clearly on each page. Only mine. Second, a voice recorder. I pressed play with hands a little more steadily than I should have. Her voice filled the quiet room, soft but firm. If they try to tamper with this, Liana, show them this tape. I trust you. Only you. It wasn't long. Only 23 seconds, but it held more meaning than Helena had ever told me in all those years. And the third was a letter. 4 lines in Hazel's sharp handwriting, slanted from decades of working in the ledgers. Blood doesn't make them worthy. If you're reading this, they've already turned on you. Take what's yours. Don't look back. I sat in the chair and stared at the words until they faded. Not from tears, but from realization. She knew, not just about the money, but about them, about how they would turn inheritance into influence, how they would wrap the eraser in polite phrases and legal memos. She knew they would use tradition as a weapon and make me feel like I was the one who had failed to belong. And yet, she had given me this. Not just the will, but the clarity, the voice, the proof. I packed the envelope, the letter, the recorder, every piece of her final step, and stuffed them into my bag. By morning, I wouldn't ask for a seat at the table anymore. I would speak the truth plainly. The kitchen was buzzing when I walked in. Celine was sitting at the edge of the counter, a coffee cup in her hand, her legs crossed like a victorious woman. Dad was flipping through the pages of his printed spreadsheets, his glasses slipping off his nose. Helena stood by the stove, stirring the oatmeal, humming a familiar tune as if we were just another family starting a quiet morning. None of them looked up when I came in. I took the envelope out of my bag and placed it on the counter between the croissants and notebooks. Celine noticed it first. Her eyes moved from my face to the envelope and then narrowed. "What's this?" she asked. The words were more of an involuntary reaction than a question. Dad didn't look up. "We're busy with something." "Liana, can this wait?" "No," I said simply. I pushed the envelope closer to him. "You'll like to read this." Helena turned, the wooden spoon still in her mouth, reached out, and glanced at the seal. Her smile faded, but only slightly. "Seriously," Celine scoffed. "You brought your own papers. Is this another attempt to interfere?" I didn't answer. I opened the lid and pulled out the will and the amendment, carefully unfolding them and placing them between them like a card. I had finished the final round of a game they thought I wasn't playing. "Signed, witnessed, and dated," I said quietly, tapping the signature line with my index finger. "You remember Margaret, don't you? My grandmother's friend from the garden club. She was there. And so was the notary." My father's fingers gripped the armrest of his chair. Helena didn't say a word, but the wooden spoon was trembling. She reached for the paper as if she could crumple it to deny what had happened. But I stopped her with my hand. "Don't," I said softly. "You knew what you were doing. You have no right to feign surprise now." For the first time in years, there was silence in the room. Not just a profound, empty silence, but the kind of silence that only comes when truth overpowers a lie. I left the papers there, went to the sink, and poured myself a glass of water. No one moved. There was no need for that. The damage was already done, and I hadn't even played the recording yet. "You've crossed the line," Helena said, her voice thick with suppressed anger. "That wasn't your grandmother's intention." I looked her in the eye and didn't blink. "You're right," I said. "She wanted the truth. She left that to me." Helena laughed, a sharp, hollow laugh. "This is revenge. You always hated being in the shadows, and now you're turning her death into a spectacle." "I've kept quiet for years," I said. "You mistook that for obedience." My father opened his mouth, but I cut him off before he could change the subject. I took the small recorder out of my pocket, placed it gently on the table, and pressed play. Hazel's voice filled the room, faint, rough, but firm. "If they try to twist this, Liana, show them this tape. I trust you. Only you." No one said a word when he finished. Helena stood frozen, her hands folded at her sides. Celine glanced at her coffee, as if it might offer a way out. I reached for my file and pulled another envelope from the counter. "Served this morning," I wrote. "Court order freezing the estate until everything is reviewed." My father's face tightened. "You're trying to break this family up." "No," I said quietly. "I just refuse to let this destroy me." I gathered the papers, put them back in my bag, and walked to the door. No shouting, no last word, just footsteps on the hardwood floor. Let them drown in silence. Let them wonder what else I had prepared. I stepped out into the hall and took out my phone. A text message was waiting for my lawyer. "Court order granted. Funds frozen pending review. You control what comes next." I stared at the screen for another moment, then switched off the recorder I was holding. I wasn't just their daughter anymore. I was now the keeper of the truth. The elevator opened onto Maddox and Langley's executive floor. The receptionist looked up suddenly, then stood up quickly as I passed. I didn't stop. I walked straight into the boardroom where 5 senior partners were already seated, whispering about the financial outlook and the third quarter forecast. Their conversation stopped when they saw me. Senior partner Leanna Harrison glared. "We didn't expect you to be like this now," I said, placing a file on the polished table. "As of last week, I have a controlling interest in the company. 51% was allocated through a trust by Eunice Maddox and is now secured by a notarized amendment. You'll find all the documentation there." Celine was already seated, her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles turned white. "This is a trick." "No," I said, sitting down at the head of the table. "This is the succession." The room fell silent until the door burst open. Martin burst in, panting heavily, his cheeks flushed. "This is outrageous." He said it sharply. "Not only can you do this, but I can," I said calmly, opening a second file. "And I will, starting with transparency." I handed out copies of internal transaction reports, the ones the old accounting team had deliberately hidden. Page 3. Julian Maddox had used company funds to cover his personal gambling losses. Over $80,000 in expenses categorized as client entertainment led directly to his personal Venmo account. Ray opened his mouth to speak, but I wasn't finished. And page 5, your limited liability company, Blue Ridge Advisory, is listed as a supplier to the company, but it doesn't provide advisory services. It administers estate distributions through inflated invoices. It's all there. The bank transfers, the timestamps, even Shell in the Cayman Islands. Celine jumped up so fast her chair scraped against the wall. You've been spying on your own family. I looked her straight in the eye. I was protecting what was left of my grandmother's name. Harrison cleared his throat, glancing quickly at the documents. We weren't informed of any of this. You know that now. Martin B. stared across the table, not with anger this time, but with something smaller, something crumbling. I didn't flinch because the nameplate in front of me no longer said guest. It said managing partner. The report arrived at dawn, 112 pages of corruption wrapped in professional language and polished formatting. The forensics team had scrutinized 6 years' worth of records. What they found didn't surprise me. It confirmed what I already knew. They hadn't just been trying to eliminate me. They had been draining the organization all along. A string of 6-figure consulting fees going back to an account in Alina's name as soon as I opened it after my grandmother was first hospitalized. Dozens of bogus invoices for non-existent departments. Equipment rentals that never arrived. Shell companies registered in mailboxes. Mailboxes in Florida, Delaware, and Zurich. And then came the final piece of information. An offshore account directly linked to Helena, secretly registered to a holding company with no physical office. The lead investigator didn't seem surprised when he handed me the summary. He said, "You have enough to file a lawsuit, criminal and civil." I nodded once. Then I emailed the entire report to the legal team with a single line. Proceed with the proceedings. Late that morning, my lawyer called. We can file today, but you need to be sure. This will be a public, loud case. I was sure. This isn't about revenge, I said. It's about honoring my grandmother, what she built, what they were supposed to protect. He paused, then said, Understood. We'll begin proceedings this afternoon. I ended the call and looked out the office window below. The city was moving on without pause. People walked into cafes, checked their watches, opened their front doors. This was the part they never understood. I didn't need to win to feel complete. All I needed was for the lies to stop. The report lay open beside me, page by page. I shaded sections and made notes for the compliance team. I didn't hesitate when I got to the figures related to my father's pension fund. I didn't stop when Alina's signature appeared on forged contracts, because recovery isn't about staying silent. It's about speaking the truth loudly and officially, and my name won't disappear. It's starting to have meaning again. The message arrived in the afternoon. A simple text. 1 hour. No lawyers. This money is owed to me. I didn't reply. I just went. The garden behind St. Alaris Church was eerily quiet. The same bench Hazel used to sit on during choir rehearsals. The same flower beds Helena pretended to tend. Her phone hidden behind her sunglasses, whispering to the estate planner while she trimmed the roses. She was already there when I arrived, wearing a pristine white dress, not a wrinkle in sight. She looked up as I approached and patted the space next to her on the bench. I didn't sit down. I have to confess, she said quietly, folding her hands in her lap. I underestimated you. That was your first mistake, I said. But it won't be your last. You think it's about power? Her voice remained calm, unconcerned. I held this family together, Liana. Every time your father wavered, I stood up for him. Every time Celine fell apart, I held her up. You were always the unexpected element. You wanted the truth, but you didn't care about the cost. I moved closer, my voice low. You weren't the one holding anything together. You controlled it. There's a difference. She looked at me. I caught a glimpse of sadness. No, just calculations. Everything falls apart, she whispered. Even the truth, you'll see. It starts slowly and then collapses suddenly. I studied her face. The calm was still there, but the certainty was cracking. She rose slowly, smoothing her dress as if the conversation had gone as she'd intended. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, but I do expect consequences. I didn't say a word. Not a gesture. I turned and walked down the stone path, leaving her behind in her silence. She didn't follow me. Back in the office, I signed the final documents authorizing the release of the testimony. Every asset, every dollar, every name, every court date, it was all already on the calendar. The courtroom wasn't cold, but something in the air made every breath heavier. I stepped onto the bench, swore in my name, and opened the file I'd been silently rehearsing for months. I started with the basics, dates, inconsistencies, names linked to the transfers they assumed would never be discovered. I spoke calmly. No exaggeration, no acting, just facts. Then I played the audio recording of Hazel's voice, clear and direct, echoing in the room. If they try to twist this, Liana, show them this tape. I trust you. Only you. The judge nodded slightly but said nothing. I handed over my grandmother's handwritten letter, signed and inked, for lines that shattered every defense they'd built. Celine stepped onto the bench next. Her tone was measured, perfectly sympathetic. We were protecting the family legacy, she said. We didn't want conflict. We wanted harmony. Liana was unstable. She wouldn't have known how to handle this responsibility. I didn't look at her as she spoke. I looked at the judge when it was my turn again. Erasing someone is not protection, I said quietly but firmly. It's cowardice in silk. Elena flinched. Helena turned away. This isn't about the legacy, I finished. This is about rewriting history. I'm not unstable. I'm not dramatic. I was an obstacle to their version of events, and now I was there to clarify it. The judge was silent for a moment, then spoke. The amended will is in effect. Full control of the estate remains with Mrs. Leanna Maddox. Any misuse of funds by Mrs. Celine Maddox and Mr. Martin Maddox will be prosecuted. Mrs. Helena Maddox is permanently removed from any trusteeship of the estate. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Outside, I walked past the journalists without answering a single question. I went back to the car, took out the small notebook Hazel had left behind, and flipped through the pages until I reached the worn one, the one that simply read, "The truth doesn't shout. It stands still." And now I too stood still. Silence returned to the lake house. No lawyers, no files, no echo of courtroom doors closing behind me. Only the sound of water lapping the pavement, the wind whistling through the trees Hazel had planted before either of us had anything to fight over. I kicked off my shoes at the door, walked down the narrow corridor to her old reading room, and sat in the chair she used every morning, coffee in one hand and pen in the other. The notebook was still there, just as I had left it. Brown leather, frayed edges, her handwriting on every page, clear and steady. I flipped through the pages until I reached the one I had marked before the trial. The ink had faded slightly, but the words still resonated in my ears, louder than anything Celine or Helena had said in months. Sometimes blood must be drawn for the body to heal. I read it again, not with sadness this time, but with understanding. They had tried to rewrite the story, to cut me out of it. They said I was too emotional, too dramatic, too difficult, but all they really did was pave the way. They handed me the pieces. I chose to build instead of tear down. I stood by the window and watched the light move across the water. They had tried to bury me. I said so loudly and firmly, but they handed me the shovel. I didn't dig a grave. I planted something. And as I turned back toward the hall, I closed the door behind me, not to keep them out, not in anger, but to draw a line. Here their story ended and mine began.
अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा बेसर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना अब बहुत ही दूर भरता है अंधेरी दीवारों में खुद को ढूंढता हूँ मैं ये जो दिन सुहाने थे उन्हीं को सोचता हूँ मैं तुम्हारे बिन ये मौसम भी बड़ा सर्द लगता है दिल का हर एक कोना बहुत ही दर्द भरता है मेरे साए भी मुझसे अब जुदा होने को कहते हैं तुझे खोने की राहों में ये आंसू बहने लगते हैं कहाँ जाऊं कहाँ ढूंढूं मेरा वो साजो सामा तो मेरी हर एक तमन्ना तू मेरी रूह का मका तू लकीरों में नहीं लिखा जो तुमने ख्वाब देखा था वफा की इस कहानी में फकत एक गम ही लिखा था सितारों से भी पूछता है पता तेरा कहाँ होगा मगर खामोश है दुनिया कहाँ मेरा जहाँ होगा बस एक बार मुड़ के देख ले मेरी बेबसी की सूरत मुझे है बस रह गया दर्द का असर, दर्द का असर।